I think one of the silliest things that you can do whenever it comes to being an entertainer is trying to reinvent the wheel. Some things just work. And some things work, and sometimes you're not going to understand why they work. But just because you don't understand why those things work doesn't mean that that thing is wrong, especially just because it's getting older or what have you. Some things old and age like bananas. Other things are timeless. In my opinion, the very first Hellraiser film, despite having some issues, it was obviously very low budget. It was obviously Clive Barker's first directorial experience, so on and so forth. Despite all of its flaws, the big thing about Hellraiser is that the concepts and ideas and tone and atmosphere in it have not, in my opinion, been matched by a horror movie, at least here in the West, in a long time, if ever. It stands alone as a very unique and scary experience that, honestly, a lot of slasher films and Western horror stories really don't come to the level to. As such, I really didn't know what to think about this idea of a reboot of the Hellraiser franchise. Though, I have to say it wasn't like there weren't talented people that were attached to this particular film, which is now out on Hulu. The director of the film, David Bruckner, had done a film that I have enjoyed called The Ritual, which is not something that everybody liked, but I really enjoyed the atmosphere of it. I really liked the tension of it. I liked the monster design. Not perfect, but it was still good, and you could kind of see that the director, he had something. You know, I couldn't really put my finger on what that something was, but it was something. And then, of course, the overall story was written by David Goyer. Now, David Goyer has been kind of up and down. He did all three of the Blade films with Wesley Snipes, but the third one tends to taint the first two in regards to his record. He worked on all three of the Dark Knight films, but after that, he had done some other films that weren't nearly as good. So, it kind of is one of those things where you look at it and you're like, yeah, this could end up being really, really good. Or it could be the shits because, you know, there's a negative part here. Either way, one thing that I would say whenever it comes to Hellraiser is its main problem in the new one is trying to reinvent the wheel. Trying to reset something that didn't really need to be reset, and in a lot of ways you end up overthinking it. So let me get straight into my gripes, because we're kind of at the 3 to 5 minute mark where most people start to tune out. My problems with this film are pretty simple. I don't like the new Cenobites. I think that their designs have gone from distinctive with an S&M influence to just being gory and gross looking for the sake of being gory and gross looking. In a way of trying to make it more sadistic and extreme, you actually end up making them look like generic enemies from a generic horror video game. It doesn't really grab the eye. Another thing that I have an issue with is the storyline. None of the characters are really interesting. Their journeys really aren't really that interesting either. If anything, I would say that the one likable character that's in this film, the older brother of the main character, the fact that he dies as early as it does, technically is kind of the death of the film. And to be honest with you, a lot of the characters just weren't really handled in a way to make them characters that you really want to keep watching. If anything, a lot of times you're just waiting for them to die. And that's something that I really don't like, because that's sort of the mentality of a slasher film. A slasher film puts you in a position where you're kind of just waiting for somebody to die in the most gory way possible because you don't like any of these people. And I really feel like by doing so, you start to lose the things that make you special. What I really liked about Hellraiser, the original film, was that Clive Barker gave us a character in Kirsty Cotton who, in a sense, resembled the journey that the audience is going to have coming into this. Surrounded her with a lot of awkwardness and a lot of tension and a lot of things of that nature, alongside other characters who are downright evil. And then, of course, introduces the Cenobites and has this interesting sort of weaving where everybody's playing games with each other. And by the end of it, everybody gets their comeuppance in a very satisfying way. But you were always interested in the journey. You weren't just sitting there waiting for the gore. You were so entranced by the world that was being created that you wanted to see more of what was going on. And that, unfortunately, is just not what we're getting here. Another criticism back on the Cenobite thing is, I'll just say this right now. I was not against the idea, because I tend to talk about political zeitgeist and things like that. I was not against the idea of Pinhead being played by a woman or being played by a transgender actress. Reason being is, in the original novel, The Hellbound Heart, Pinhead is androgynous. You don't really know if Pinhead is a man or a woman. The problem that we run into has nothing to do with gender. The actress who plays Pinhead in this film just doesn't have the same screen presence that Doug Bradley has as Pinhead. It's nothing personal against the individual who played Pinhead in the new film. I don't remember the name. I don't really care because I'm probably not going to remember them past this. But Doug Bradley simply had a presence to him. Something about his body language. Something about the way he carried himself. Something about the way that he stood. Something about the way that he spoke. Just the way that he delivers the line, "We'll tear your soul apart," is chilling. Whereas this new Pinhead just didn't have that. They didn't have the panache. They didn't have the energy. And part of that might be the fault of the director, not really directing them properly. I don't really know, but it just didn't translate. And unfortunately, I really feel like, and I'm probably going to get some shit from Zack Snyder fans for this, but one thing that I've always criticized Zack Snyder about is that oftentimes he tackles certain subjects and he's not really getting what made that idea that great. You know, this is actually something that, you know, to not just use my criticisms, I'm going to use somebody else's as a shield because I'm a jerk, is a guy I know, Ethan Van Sciver, who's a longtime DC Comics artist, and one thing that he'll commonly say about Zack Snyder's DC films is that Zack was missing the overall tone of what DC was supposed to be about. And I agree with that. And I really feel like this is sort of making the same mistake that Zack Snyder made with some DCEU stuff, but this is being done with Hellraiser, is missing the overall tone, missing the enjoyment of it, and missing the influences and the method of horror that Clive Barker brings. And that, to me, is very sad, because there's something about the awkwardness, and there's something about the constant feeling of discomfort that the original Hellraiser had that this film just doesn't have. The thing about constantly being in situations that are about playing mental games with people, constantly having these lines that you're walking that are razor thin between pleasure and pain, put the reader or the viewer or anything in that sort of a story in a situation where they don't really know what to feel. Is this alluring, or is this disgusting? Or is it both at the same time and you don't know why you feel this way? There's nothing like that in this new film. It's just all gross and bloody. And it just feels so generic. Now here's the thing. It's not a bad film. It's just not Hellraiser, which is a big problem. You should always be in a position where you're trying to make the thing that started it all. And I'm sorry, the new designs and all this other stuff, the lack of atmosphere, the lack of tone, it just makes the whole thing disappointing. So, ultimately, I would say if you're a diehard Hellraiser fan, you're not going to like this movie. You're probably going to look at it and just see what I saw and see that it really missed the mark, which is unfortunate. Now, one thing that I am holding out a little bit of hope for is that apparently there is actually going to be a Hellraiser series that's going to be on HBO that Clive Barker is actually directly involved in. And that, I think, is a very positive thing. Because, again, I really like Clive Barker's brutality and his approach to horror. I'm actually a big fan of his artwork because I enjoy brutality. I enjoy scary things. I enjoy the weird and the disturbing. You know, I've always been a fan of that. It's reflected in my own work. So, needless to say, again, if you're not a fan of seeing the originals of something get kind of twisted in a bad way, or you hate it when people try to reinvent the wheel when the wheel does not need to be reinvented, well, you're not going to like this film. Anyway, to go ahead and close this out, I want to thank you, of course, for watching it and listening to this old fat guy's opinion. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe if you enjoyed it as well. And if you're interested in my art and the things that I do, head over to Indiegogo.com right now. Links are in the description to both of my current comics. ENGLEWOOD Book 2, which is about an MMA star turned superhero, and then 3 Nights, 4 Days. That takes a little bit of inspiration from Clive Barker. Not a lot, but a little bit. About 3 crusaders coming home for the Second Crusade to find that demons have taken over the region and they must fight back against them or else be swallowed by the fires of Armageddon. With all that said, though, folks, my name is Micah Curtis, comic book writer, journalist, and your favorite vanilla gorilla. Everybody have yourselves a great rest of your day.